"She's nobody now. Let her watch." That's what Adrian Blackwell whispered to his mistress loud enough for Claire to hear the moment he walked into that courtroom. Then he reached over, straightened Vivian's collar with both hands, and kissed her cheek. Slow, deliberate, 3 feet from his wife of 11 years. Claire heard every word, felt every second of it. She didn't scream, didn't break, didn't even look up. She just placed one document on the table, then another, because the man who just called her nobody was about to discover exactly who she was. Before we go any further, if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment right now and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Claire Whitmore had not slept the night before. Not because she was afraid. She had moved past fear somewhere around the 4th month of what her therapist gently called the unraveling. She had stopped being afraid the night she sat alone in the kitchen of a house worth $4 million, listening to the silence and realized that the silence had always been there. She had simply been too busy to hear it. No, she had not slept because she spent the night reading. Old emails, old calendar invites, old bank transfers that she had never questioned because she had trusted him completely, the way you trust someone who once held your hand in a hospital waiting room and told you that everything was going to be okay. She read until 3 in the morning. Then she made herself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the city breathe. By 6, she was dressed. By 7:45, she was standing outside the Manhattan Family Court building on Worth Street, holding a leather folder against her chest, watching pigeons argue over a piece of pretzel on the sidewalk. Samantha Reed, her attorney, appeared beside her at exactly 7:50. "You ready?" Samantha asked. Claire considered the question seriously. "I've been ready for 9 months," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." Samantha nodded once. She was the kind of woman who communicated entire paragraphs in a single nod. "Good, then let's go in." The marble hallway of the courthouse smelled the way courthouses always smell of old paper and consequence. Claire had never been inside one before today. She had spent 11 years inside a marriage that she believed was solid enough that courthouses would never be necessary. She had been wrong about that. She was trying to be honest with herself about all the things she had been wrong about. They found courtroom 14B at the end of a long corridor. The door was heavy and moved slowly. Claire pushed it open herself. She saw him immediately. Of course she did. You always see them immediately. The person who changed your life, whether they improved it or destroyed it, always registers in your peripheral vision before your conscious mind catches up. It's some primitive survival mechanism she imagined. Recognize the threat. Assess the danger. Adrian Blackwell was seated at the respondent's table in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. His hair was the same, his posture was the same. That particular way he held his shoulders slightly back, slightly elevated, like a man who had decided long ago that the world was a place that owed him something and had simply been waiting to collect. I was talking to his attorney, a silver-haired man named Gerald Howe, who had once been described in a New York Times profile as the most expensive litigator money can buy and worth every penny. And then there was Vivian. Vivian Cross sat in the gallery directly behind Adrian, close enough that if he leaned back slightly, their shoulders would touch. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer and a silk blouse. Her dark hair was blown out perfectly. She had the look of a woman who had spent considerable time this morning making herself appear as though she had spent no time at all. She was 32 years old, and she radiated the particular confidence of someone who believes she has already won. Claire looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked away. She did not look away because the sight of Vivian hurt her. She looked away because Vivian Cross was not the point. She had spent months making that mistake, treating Vivian as the cause of her pain, rather than a symptom of something much older and much more calculated. She was done making that mistake. She sat down beside Samantha at the petitioner's table. "Don't look at him," Samantha said quietly. "I'm not," Claire said. "Don't look at her either." "I'm not." "Good. Look at Judge Whitaker when she comes in. Look at me when I'm speaking. Look at the documents when I present them. That's all you need to look at today." Claire arranged her folder on the table in front of her. She folded her hands on top of it. She breathed. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Eleanor Whitaker entered at 8:15. She was 60 years old, and she had the bearing of a woman who had heard every version of every story and had long since run out of patience for the ones that wasted her time. Her gray hair was cut close. Her reading glasses were hanging from a chain around her neck. She settled into her chair with the efficiency of someone who had performed this exact motion thousands of times and never once thought about it consciously. "We're here in the matter of Whitmore versus Blackwell," she said, flipping open a folder. "Dissolution of marriage, division of marital assets, and related financial matters. Is both counsel present?" "Present, Your Honor," Samantha said, standing. "Present," Gerald Howe said, buttoning his jacket as he rose. Judge Whitaker looked over her glasses. "Sit down. This isn't a stage production." She paused. "Though I understand from the file that one party has attempted to treat it as one. We'll address that." Gerald Howe's expression didn't change. He was too experienced to flinch publicly. But Claire noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the microscopic adjustment of his jaw. Good, she thought. Notice things. Pay attention. Adrian across the aisle did not look at her. He was looking at his attorney. His expression was entirely relaxed, the practiced calm of a man who had sat in high-pressure rooms his entire career and learned to weaponize composure. Gerald Howe opened his proceedings by presenting Adrian's position clearly. This was a marriage of 11 years in which one partner, Claire, had been the primary beneficiary of the other's financial success. Adrian Blackwell had built a technology company, Nova Crest Solutions, from a 3-person startup to a publicly traded corporation valued at $900 million. During the course of this marriage, Claire had left her career in financial consulting to manage the household. While her contributions as a homemaker were acknowledged, the financial achievements of the marriage were attributable to one party. Gerald's voice was smooth and measured. He was not unkind in his phrasing. He was something worse than unkind. He was technically polite while delivering a portrait of Claire that was designed to erase her. She sat very still and listened. "Mr. Blackwell has proposed a settlement that includes a generous lump sum payment, continuation of health insurance for a period of 3 years, and the right to remain in the family home in Westchester for 6 months during the transition period," Gerald said. "We believe this is a more than fair arrangement for Ms. Whitmore's circumstances." Her circumstances. Not their marriage. Not 11 years. Her circumstances, like she was a problem to be managed, a line item in a budget, a variable to be accounted for and moved off the spreadsheet. Claire felt Samantha's hand rest briefly on her arm. Just for a second. Just long enough to say, "I heard it too. Stay steady." Judge Whitaker made a note. "And the petitioner's response," Samantha stood. She was 45 years old and had the quiet intensity of a woman who had been underestimated her entire career and had learned to turn that into a competitive advantage. She did not raise her voice. She never raised her voice. Clara had noticed this in all their meetings, how Samantha's voice actually got lower when she had something important to say. "Your Honor, the respondent's framing of this marriage is, to put it plainly, a work of fiction," Samantha said. "And we intend to demonstrate that in detail." Gerald Howe looked up. "Counsel, Mr. Howe will have every opportunity to respond," Judge Whitaker said. "Continue, Ms. Reed." "Thank you, Your Honor." Samantha opened her own folder. "The respondent would like this court to believe that Claire Whitmore spent 11 years as a passive beneficiary of Adrian Blackwell's success. We will show that the opposite is true, that Ms. Whitmore was not merely a supportive spouse, she was an active architect of the conditions that made Nova Crest's early growth possible. And we will further show that Mr. Blackwell has taken deliberate steps to conceal this fact, to conceal certain financial assets from discovery, and to construct a public narrative about this marriage that protects his reputation at his wife's direct expense." The room was quiet. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Adrian's jaw moved. Just slightly. Clara was watching now. She had turned to look at him because she needed to see it, needed to see the moment when his certainty developed its first hairline fracture. There it was. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the collapse she had once imagined in her darkest, most indulgent moments of anger. It was subtle, a slight tightening of the muscle along his jaw, a barely perceptible shift in how he held his shoulders. He had not expected her to come in swinging. He had expected her to be grateful for the settlement, to take what he offered, sign what he needed her to sign, and disappear quietly into the version of herself that he had decided was accurate, a woman who owed everything she had to him and knew it. He had been so certain of that, and he had been wrong. Gerald Howe was already leaning in close to Adrian, speaking quietly. Adrian nodded once and sat back, Whatever he was feeling, he was burying it fast. He was good at that. Claire had always known he was good at that. It was one of the things she had once admired about him, that capacity to absorb difficulty and keep moving. She understood now that it worked the same way whether the difficulty came from outside or whether he had created it himself. Samantha returned to her seat. "First witness," Judge Whitaker asked. "We'd like to enter several documents into evidence first, Your Honor," Samantha said. "Before we call any witnesses, the foundation needs to be established." The judge gestured. "Proceed." And this was where Claire's story truly began. Not on the day she discovered the affair. Not on the day Adrian told her he wanted out. Not on the sleepless night before this hearing. It began 11 years ago in a different city with a different version of both of them. She had met Adrian Blackwell at a financial conference in Chicago. She was 23 years old and working as a junior analyst at a consulting firm that specialized in early-stage technology companies. He was 28, running a startup on what he later admitted was maximum hope and minimum runway. And he had walked into the networking event with the energy of a man who was not going to allow himself to fail, even if he wasn't entirely sure he wasn't going to. She had been assigned to review his company's financial projections as part of a case study her firm was doing on emerging tech startups. His projections were ambitious, wildly so. But there was something underneath the ambition, a particular structural insight about how mid-sized companies were underusing their own internal data that she recognized as genuinely novel. She had stayed late that night writing a 6-page memo to her supervisor, making the case that this particular startup deserved closer attention. Her supervisor had forwarded the memo to the firm's managing partner. The managing partner had forwarded it to 3 investors. 2 of those investors had contacted NovaCrest within the month. One of them became the lead investor in NovaCrest's Series A round the funding that kept the company alive long enough to develop the product that made it what it eventually became. Adrian had asked her to dinner to say thank you. She had said yes. 6 months later, they were together. 2 years after that, they were engaged. The wedding was small by the standards they could eventually afford 40 people a restaurant in the West Village. No DJ. Just a friend with a good playlist and a willingness to stay until midnight. She had loved him. She wanted to be precise about that even now. She had loved the man she married with a specificity and depth that deserved to be named honestly, even in the context of how badly things ended. Grief is not the same as weakness. Missing what something was is not the same as wanting it back. She had loved him. And then she had watched slowly over many years as the man she loved was replaced, not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment, but gradually, the way rivers change course by someone who used the language of love while practicing something else entirely. In the early years, it was wonderful. She told her mother once that being with Adrian felt like being on a team, with someone that particular pleasure of working towards something together, of building something out of nothing, of seeing an idea turn into a reality. She had continued working through the early years of their marriage, contributing her salary to their joint finances, her industry knowledge to his business decisions, her professional network to his expanding list of contacts. When they decided to have children, they made the choice together that Claire would step back from her career temporarily. She had been offered a significant promotion at the firm, a senior partnership track position that would have required 60-hour weeks and frequent travel. They sat together at the kitchen table and talked through the math of it, the logistics of it, and the decision they arrived at felt mutual, felt considered, felt like a partnership. She left the firm. They had 2 children, Emma and Ben, now 8 and 6 years old, who were staying with Claire's mother in Connecticut during these proceedings. She had not told them much. She was protecting them the way mothers protect children, by absorbing the impact herself so they feel less of it. After Emma was born, and then Ben, Claire did not go back to work. By the time she might have returned, NovaCrest had grown enough that her involvement wasn't just optional. Adrian was actively asking for her input on certain decisions, her sense of the market, her feel for when an investor relationship was solid versus when it was performance. She was not on the payroll. She did not have a title. She was his wife. She was his wife in a way that meant she was also something else. An advisor, a strategist, a person whose contributions existed entirely in the negative space around his career, visible only in what succeeded because of them, invisible in every public record. She had not thought of this as an arrangement to be resented. She had thought of it as a marriage. And then she had come home early from her sister's birthday weekend in Connecticut on a Tuesday in March and found receipts. Not the theatrical discovery of the affair, no dramatic confrontation, no caught-in-the-act moment. Just receipts. A hotel receipt in Adrian's jacket pocket when she was about to take it to the dry cleaner. A restaurant receipt for two on a night when he had told her he was in a client dinner that she wasn't invited to. A credit card statement with charges she didn't recognize from a florist she'd never heard of. She had sat down on the bedroom floor. She had not cried. She had simply sat there for a long time, and she had thought with great clarity, with a precision that surprised her, about what she actually knew versus what she suspected, about what could be proven versus what was only felt, about what her options were and what each of them would cost. She had not confronted him that night. She had put the receipts back, she had ordered dinner, she had talked to him about the kids' school schedule and whether they should do anything for the 4th of July. She had started paying attention. It took 3 months to assemble the full picture. It was Vivian Cross. She discovered a woman who ran her own boutique communications firm, which had not coincidentally handled Novacrest's public relations for the past 2 years. There was a bitter irony in that. The woman helping Adrian control his narrative had become part of the narrative he needed to control. Claire found this out the way you find most important things in the digital age, not through some brilliant investigation, but through an accumulation of small, overlooked details that, once you know what you're looking at, form a pattern so clear it seems impossible that you missed it. She did not confront him. She called Samantha Reed. A friend had recommended Samantha with a specific endorsement. She's the one you call when the other side thinks they've already won. Claire had written that down in her phone's notes app and then deleted it immediately because she was still sharing an iCloud account with Adrian and had not yet disabled that feature. She had taken care of that the same day. Her first meeting with Samantha was in a conference room in Midtown. She brought 3 folders, one with the receipts and financial statements, one with her own career records going back to before she met Adrian, and one with a timeline she had written herself, a careful chronological account of every way she had contributed to Adrian's career and Novacrest's growth that had never been officially documented. Samantha had read through all 3 folders. She had not expressed shock. She had not offered sympathy, which was fine. Claire hadn't come for sympathy. When she was finished reading, she set the folders down on the table and folded her hands. "Tell me about the Series A," Samantha said. Claire looked at her. "I told you the memo I wrote is in folder 2. "I know, I read it. Tell me about it in your own words." So Claire did. She told Samantha about the conference, the projections, the memo. She told her about the investors and how they came to know about Novacrest and why. She told her about the conversations she'd had with 2 of those investors over the years, how they had remained in her professional orbit because she had maintained those relationships long after Adrian stopped thinking it was necessary to do so personally. Samantha listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Are any of these investors still active in Novacrest?" "One of them is on the board," Claire said. "He sent me a card when Ben was born. Adrian doesn't know that we've stayed in touch." Samantha nodded slowly. "And the relationship to the Series A. Can you document your role in initiating that?" "The memo is time-stamped," Claire said. "There are email chains. My firm archived everything. I still have my login from that period." Samantha looked at her for a long moment. "Claire," she said, "I think your husband has made a very significant strategic error. That had been 6 months ago. 6 months of preparation, documentation, affidavits, financial forensics, and a quiet, careful dismantling of the version of events that Adrian had begun to construct the moment he decided this marriage was over. He had hired a PR firm. Not Vivian's, that relationship was too complicated for obvious reasons. A different firm. He had begun giving interviews that subtly positioned him as a self-made man in the most traditional sense, a founder who had built something from nothing through sheer force of will. He had not mentioned Claire in any of them, not once. That omission, Claire had realized, was a kind of answer to the question she hadn't known she was asking, because you don't erase someone unless their presence complicates your story. In the courtroom now, Samantha was laying the first documents on the table before Judge Whitaker. "Exhibit A," she said, "is a memo written by Claire Whitmore, then Claire Daly, on October 14th, 11 years ago, recommending that the investment firm where she was employed pursue a closer examination of Novacrest Solutions. Exhibit B is the internal communication, confirming that this memo was forwarded up the chain and resulted in direct investor contact. Gerald Howe was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance. We're here to discuss marital assets, not the petitioner's premarital employment history. The petitioner's premarital employment history is directly relevant to the formation of NovaCrest's early investor relationships, Samantha replied, which directly contributed to the company's survival and eventual valuation. If Mr. Howe would prefer, I can demonstrate the chain of causation in more detail. Judge Whitaker looked from one attorney to the other. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Reed. Across the aisle, Adrian Blackwell was very still. He was looking at Exhibit A. He had seen the document before in another context, in another life. He knew exactly what it was. He knew exactly what it meant. And for the first time since walking into this courtroom, with the certainty of a man who had already written the ending of this story, something behind his eyes shifted. It was not panic. It was something more specific than panic. It was recognition. The recognition of a man who had spent so long controlling the narrative that he had begun to believe the narrative. Who had told the story of himself as the sole architect of his success so many times in so many rooms to so many people that somewhere along the way he had genuinely forgotten the details that complicated the story. He had forgotten because forgetting was easier. He had forgotten because it was convenient. He had forgotten Claire now understood because the man she had slowly watched replace her husband over the years was the kind of man who was capable of forgetting things that didn't serve him. She watched him read Exhibit A, and she felt not satisfaction, not triumph, something quieter than that. Something that felt after all these months like solid ground. She had spent 11 years being someone's unseen foundation. Today the foundation was visible. Gerald leaned in and whispered something urgent to Adrian. Adrian responded without moving his eyes from the documents. His response was 2 words. Claire couldn't hear them. But she could read the set of his jaw, the particular angle of his expression, and she recognized them as the words of a man recalibrating. Samantha introduced Exhibit C, a chain of email correspondence between Claire and the lead Series A investor from 8 years ago during NovaCrest's second major growth push, in which Claire had advised the investor on how to structure a conversation with the board that ultimately resulted in a strategic pivot that tripled the company's revenue within 18 months. The emails were professional. Clinical even. They read exactly like what they were, 2 people with expertise in finance and technology having a substantive conversation about a company's direction. One of those people had a title and an equity stake. The other had neither. Objection, Gerald said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier precision. Counsel is selectively presenting private communications. With the full consent of both parties to those communications, Samantha said, the investor in question has provided a signed declaration, which we have submitted as Exhibit D. The declaration was from a man named William Hartley, who was, as Claire had mentioned to Samantha, still on NovaCrest's board. He was 70 years old. He had built and sold 4 companies. He was not a man who signed declarations lightly, and the court would know that. His declaration stated in measured but unambiguous language that during the critical growth periods of NovaCrest Solutions, he had relied substantially on insight and guidance from Claire Whitmore, that he had always understood her role in the company's development to be significantly more influential than her official non-employment suggested, and that the Series A investment, without which in his professional assessment the company would not have survived, had originated specifically from her direct professional recommendation. Vivian in the gallery had stopped moving. She had been very still for the last few minutes. Claire could see her in her peripheral vision, not because she was watching her, but because stillness draws attention the way sudden noise does. Vivian Cross had come into this room radiating confidence. The confidence was still on her face, technically, but it no longer reached her eyes. She was doing math. Claire recognized the expression because she had worn it herself once. The expression of a person who is rearranging what they know into a new shape and discovering that the new shape is frightening. Adrian said something to Gerald in a voice too low to carry. Gerald responded by opening a different section of his files, pivoting, looking for a different angle. Judge Whitaker took off her reading glasses and set them on her desk. "Ms. Reed," she said, "before you continue, I want to understand the scope of what you're presenting here. Are you arguing that the petitioner has a claim to equity in NovaCrest Solutions itself, We're arguing that the petitioner's contributions to Nova Crest's development, while unofficial, were substantial and material, Samantha said, and that the settlement proposed by the respondent fails to reflect the actual value of those contributions. We are further arguing that the respondent has deliberately structured their financial affairs in a way that obscures the extent of marital assets. The room was quiet. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," Judge Whitaker said. She rose without ceremony. The bailiff called the room to order. In the 30 seconds before the gallery began to move, Adrian turned. He turned in his chair and he looked across the aisle at Claire. It was the first time their eyes had met all morning. She held his gaze. She did not look away. She did not soften. She did not perform anything for him. No anger, no satisfaction, no residual warmth. She looked at him the way you look at something you have finally understood, completely, clearly, quietly, without needing to say anything. He was the first to look away. In the gallery, Vivian Cross reached for her phone. Her hands, Claire noticed, were not quite steady. Samantha leaned over. "How are you doing?" "Fine," Claire said. "Thirsty, I have water." "I'm fine, Samantha." Her attorney studied her face for a moment. "You know what I was thinking, watching his expression when Hartley's declaration came in?" "What?" "I was thinking that the most dangerous person in a negotiation is the one who prepared when the other side assumed they hadn't." Claire smoothed the front of her jacket. "He assumed I was the same person he married. He assumed that person was passive." "Was she?" "No," Claire said. "She was patient." The bailiff announced 5 minutes remaining before the judge would return. Across the aisle, Gerald Howe was speaking rapidly into his phone. Adrian was sitting very still, his eyes fixed on the middle distance. The relaxed certainty was gone from his shoulders. What remained looked less like confidence and more like effort. Vivian Cross had left the gallery. Claire didn't know when exactly, sometime during the recess. She was simply there, and then she wasn't. The seat directly behind Adrian's chair was empty now, and Adrian had not seemed to notice yet, and Claire found that detail of all the details of this morning somehow the most telling. She had always been the one who noticed when someone left. He had always been the one who didn't. Judge Whitaker returned exactly at 9:52. The bailiff called the room to order again. She settled into her chair and opened her folder. "Ms. Reed," she said, "you mentioned deliberate concealment of marital assets. I want to give you the opportunity to substantiate that before we continue. Do you have what you need to do that now?" Samantha Reed stood up. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for exactly this question. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. "I do." And Claire Whitmore sat very straight in her chair, both hands folded on top of her leather folder, and breathed. She was ready. She had been ready for a very long time. She had been ready, she realized, since the night she sat on that bedroom floor with those receipts in her hand and felt something in her shift, not break, but shift, the way tectonic plates shift before an earthquake, slow and deep and irreversible, the world rearranging itself into a shape that would be terrifying if you were not prepared for it. She had prepared, and now the ground was moving. The recess lasted 28 minutes. Claire knew because she counted. Not obsessively, she wasn't that person anymore, the one who tracked every minute of Adrian's schedule, trying to figure out where the gaps were and what lived inside them. She counted because counting gave her something to do with the part of her brain that wanted to replay the look on his face when Samantha laid William Hartley's declaration on that table. She counted because she needed to stay present, and numbers, unlike memories, don't pull you under. 28 minutes. Samantha spent most of them on her phone in the hallway, speaking in the clipped, efficient shorthand of someone confirming that everything was still in place. Claire sat at the petitioner's table and drank half a bottle of water and did not look at the door through which Adrian had disappeared with Gerald Howe the moment the judge left the bench. She did not need to see that conversation to know what it sounded like. She had been in enough of Adrian's high-stakes conversations, had sat quietly nearby while he managed crises, had listened through thin hotel walls and office partitions and the particular acoustics of expensive cars to know exactly how he performed under pressure. He would be calm. That was the thing people always got wrong about Adrian Blackwell. They expected a powerful man to become loud when cornered. Adrian got quieter, more precise, more dangerous in some ways, because the quieter he became, the more completely he was focused on finding the single pressure point that would change the situation in his favor. He would be looking for her pressure point right now. She hoped he was having trouble finding it. The bailiff returned at 9:58. 2 minutes later, the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and Gerald Howe walked back in, followed by Adrian. Adrian's expression had been reset. That was the only word for it, reset to neutral, professional, composed. He took his seat. He set his water glass down precisely. He opened his folder to a specific page, as though he had spent the recess calmly reviewing his notes. He had not. Claire knew that, but no one else in this room would. Vivian did not return to the gallery. That seat remained empty. Adrian had not looked for her. Claire noticed this the way she noticed everything now, not with satisfaction, but with the quiet clarity of someone who had spent months learning to see clearly after years of choosing not to. Judge Whittaker came back at 10:01. She settled into her chair, adjusted her glasses, and looked at Samantha. "You were about to substantiate the concealment claim, Ms. Reed." "Yes, Your Honor." Samantha stood and reached for the next set of documents. "I'd like to introduce Exhibits E through K." Gerald Howe was already on his feet. "Your Honor, we have not had the opportunity to fully review. You received these documents in discovery, Mr. Howe," Samantha said, not looking at him. 6 weeks ago, certified delivery." Judge Whittaker looked at Gerald. "Is that accurate?" A pause. The pause of a man choosing his next word very carefully. There was some question as to whether those specific documents fell within the scope of Mr. Howe. The judge's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. "Yes or no? Did you receive documents from opposing counsel 6 weeks ago?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then sit down." He sat. Samantha laid the exhibits on the table with the particular stillness of someone who has rehearsed this moment without allowing herself to be attached to it. Exhibits E through K are financial records subpoenaed from 3 separate entities: Meridian Holdings, LLC Coastal Bridge Investments, and a real estate trust registered in Delaware under the name Ashford Family Trust. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. All 3 entities were established by or on behalf of Adrian Blackwell between 4 and 7 years ago. None of them were disclosed in the respondent's initial financial affidavit. The room did not erupt. It didn't need to. The kind of revelation that Samantha had just delivered doesn't require noise. It requires the opposite. It requires the particular silence that falls when everyone in a room has just processed the same information and each of them is privately deciding what it means. Judge Whittaker's pen moved. A note. Just a note, steady and deliberate. Adrian's hand on the table in front of him pressed flat against the surface. It was a small movement, a stabilizing movement, the kind you make when you need to feel something solid. Gerald Howe spoke first. "Your Honor, we'll stipulate that these entities exist, but the characterization of concealment is supported by the fact that they were omitted from your client's sworn financial disclosure," Samantha said, "which is not a technicality. It is a material misrepresentation under oath." The word oath landed in the room and stayed there. Claire watched Adrian's face. He was looking straight ahead at a point somewhere above Judge Whittaker's head, and his jaw was set in the way it set when he was applying active, conscious effort to appearing unconcerned. She had seen that look in board meetings when a quarter came in below projections. She had seen it in restaurants when a business deal fell apart over the appetizers. She had never expected to see it directed at her. She had not expected it to make her feel so little. That surprised her even now. She had spent months imagining this moment and the feelings it would produce. She had imagined rage grief, the complicated satisfaction of vindication. What she actually felt was a kind of remove, like watching a movie she had already seen. She knew the plot. She knew the ending. She was simply here to observe. Samantha continued. Meridian Holdings was established 7 years ago and holds 4 commercial real estate properties in New Jersey and Connecticut, with a combined current value of approximately $6.2 million. Coastal Bridge Investments was established 5 years ago and holds a portfolio of private equity positions, current estimated value $3.8 million. The Ashford Family Trust. Gerald said, "Objection, Your Honor. The Ashford Trust is a legitimate estate planning, is named after the street where Adrian Blackwell grew up," Samantha said, "and was established 3 years ago, 18 months before he first mentioned divorce to my client." She paused. "The trust holds liquid assets currently valued at approximately $2.1 million. The numbers were in the room now. $12 million, give or take, Assets that had not existed as far as the court had been told when Adrian Blackwell submitted his sworn statement of financial disclosure. Judge Whitaker set her pen down. "Mr. Blackwell," she said. Adrian turned to face her. His expression was composed. It cost him something to keep it that way. Claire could see the cost even if no one else could. "Your Honor," he said, and his voice was steady. "I'd like my counsel to address—" "I'll hear from your counsel in a moment," she said. "I'm speaking to you. These entities, you are aware of them." "Yes, Your Honor. And they were not included in your financial disclosure." It was not a question. He answered it anyway. "My counsel advised me that—" "Mr. Blackwell." Judge Whitaker's voice had developed an edge, not sharp enough to cut, but sharp enough to be felt. "I've been on this bench for 19 years. I have heard every version of that sentence, and I want to tell you plainly that however it ends, it does not help you this morning. Your counsel can speak to the legal specifics. I am asking you whether you knew these assets existed when you signed your financial disclosure." A long pause, the longest pause in the room so far. "Yes," Adrian said. Claire released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. That one word, that single syllable, it was not a confession, not legally, not in itself, but it was the crack in the structure, the place where the weight of everything else would eventually concentrate and force its way through. Gerald Howe looked like a man who had just watched someone move a chess piece that could not be unmoved. Samantha sat down. She sat down because she didn't need to say anything. She had built something in this room in the last 90 minutes, built it carefully, document by document, question by question, and it was standing on its own now. It didn't need her to keep holding it up. Claire reached for her water. Her hand was steady. 10 minutes later, during a brief procedural discussion between the judge and both attorneys about the scheduling of additional review, Adrian's phone, set to silent, placed face down on the table, lit up with a notification that he didn't see in time to prevent Gerald from seeing. Gerald leaned in, read something, and then set his hand over the phone without expression. He didn't tell Adrian what it said. I didn't need to. The fact that he covered it told Claire everything she needed to know about whether the notification was good news or bad news. She was fairly certain it was bad news. She was right. What she didn't know yet, what she wouldn't know until the afternoon session, was that the notification was from Vivian Cross. And that Vivian Cross, sitting in the lobby of the courthouse, because she had walked out of the gallery and found she could not make herself go back in and could not make herself go home, had spent the 28-minute recess doing something that would change the shape of this day entirely. But that came later. What happened next was this. Judge Whitaker recessed for lunch at 12:15. The morning session had run 45 minutes over schedule because the weight of what Samantha had presented required more time than the court had originally allocated. The judge made no comment about this. She simply noted that the afternoon session would begin at 2 o'clock and that she expected both parties to be on time. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Claire stood with Samantha for 3 minutes while Samantha checked her messages and confirmed something with a paralegal who appeared from a side corridor, handed her a manila envelope, and disappeared again. "Lunch," Samantha said. "We need to eat something." "I'm not hungry." "That's not what I asked." Samantha steered her toward the elevator. "You need food, and you need 20 minutes where you're not thinking about Adrian Blackwell. Both of those things are requirements, not suggestions." They went to a diner 2 blocks from the courthouse. It was the kind of place that had been there forever, the kind that had survived every wave of displacement that had changed the neighborhood around it, that still had laminated menus and coffee in thick white mugs and a lunch counter where 3 people sat in easy silence. Claire ordered a grilled cheese and ate half of it. Samantha ordered a turkey club and ate the whole thing with the focused efficiency of someone treating eating as a professional task to be completed. "He's going to try to pivot," Samantha said over her coffee. "This afternoon, Gerald is good enough to know that defending the concealment directly is a losing strategy, so they'll try to reframe. Argue that the asset values are overstated, question the relevance to the settlement calculation, maybe try to introduce something about your conduct during the marriage that shifts the narrative." Claire looked up. "What about my conduct?" Samantha met her eyes steadily. "Is there anything they could use?" "No." "Nothing he could misrepresent." "He can misrepresent anything," Claire said. "He's very good at it, but there's nothing that would hold up." Samantha nodded. Good, because when people run out of legitimate defenses, they look for personal ones. It's not about winning the legal argument at that point. It's about making the other side look worse than they do. Claire set her coffee down. He already tried that. The press thing. Tell me again. 3 weeks ago, a piece ran in a business publication framed as a profile of his company, his leadership. But there was a paragraph. She paused. It described the divorce as something he was navigating thoughtfully after years of incompatibility. It mentioned that he had been the primary financial provider for the family and that he was committed to ensuring a fair and dignified resolution. Samantha's expression didn't change. And you know it was placed. Vivian's firm handles his media relationships. The journalist who wrote it has worked with her company 3 times in the last 2 years. Claire picked up her coffee again. It wasn't an accident. No, Samantha agreed. It was a preemptive narrative. He was trying to establish the terms of the public story before the legal story got out. She paused. It didn't work. But it tells you something about what he was afraid of. I was afraid of exactly this, Claire said. What's in those folders? What the court can see now? Yes. Samantha looked at her. How are you, honestly? The question sat between them for a moment. Claire thought about it seriously because Samantha was not a person who asked questions she didn't want real answers to. I feel like I've been preparing for something for so long, she said finally, that now that it's actually happening, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel. That's normal. I know, it just feels strange. She turned her coffee cup in both hands. He looked at me this morning, during the recess, just for a second. I know, I saw. He looked... She stopped, started again. He looked like he was seeing me for the first time, not me specifically, just someone he hadn't accounted for. Someone who didn't match the version in his head. Samantha was quiet for a moment. Good, she said. Let him look. They were back at this courthouse by 1:30. The hallway outside courtroom 14B was quieter than it had been in the morning. A few attorneys moving between rooms, a clerk with a cart of files, the ordinary machinery of a place where lives get legally reorganized running on schedule. Adrian and Gerald were not visible. They were somewhere a conference room, most likely doing exactly what Samantha had predicted, rebuilding their approach for the afternoon. At 1:55, Samantha's phone rang. She looked at the screen and excused herself, stepping away from Claire to take the call. Claire watched her face from a distance. The particular stillness that meant something significant was being communicated, the almost imperceptible shift in her expression that meant the something significant was not bad. When Samantha came back, she didn't say anything immediately. What? Claire asked. Samantha slid her phone into her jacket pocket. You remember I mentioned there was one more thing we were waiting to confirm before the afternoon session. The banking records from the Delaware Trust. Not just the banking records, Samantha said. There were emails. She paused. Communications between Adrian and the attorney who set up the Ashford Trust, discussing the timing of the trust's establishment, specifically discussing the fact that it was being set up before any formal divorce proceedings began in a way that would make the assets harder to identify as marital property. Claire looked at her. It's not just concealment, Samantha said. It's documented planning, with dates, with explicit language about protecting assets from a divorce that hadn't happened yet, but that he was clearly anticipating. She paused again. This wasn't impulsive, Claire. This was deliberate. He started building the architecture for this long before he told you the marriage was over. The hallway was still busy around them. A clerk wheeled a cart past. 2 attorneys argued quietly about scheduling near the elevator. The ordinary sounds of an ordinary Thursday in a courthouse. Claire heard none of it. She was back in the kitchen of that Westchester house, 11 years of accumulated life around her, sitting across from Adrian, while he told her calmly and carefully that he thought they had grown apart, that he wasn't happy, that he thought it was time to be honest with each other about what this marriage had become. He had sat there and said those things with the full knowledge she understood now that he had already been building the mechanism to leave her with as little as possible. Not recently, not in a moment of panic, deliberately over time with the kind of patient planning that she had once in a different life admired about him. She had been in that kitchen crying, and he had been executing a strategy. Claire, Samantha said. I'm fine, she said. I know you are, but you just went somewhere else for a second. I'm back. She straightened her jacket. Are we ready to use it this afternoon? The emails are being certified right now. We'll have them in hand by 2:15. Samantha looked at her steadily. It's the twist they didn't see coming, Claire. When this hits the record, the settlement they proposed this morning becomes not just inadequate. It becomes evidence of the same pattern, an attempt to minimize your claim knowing what the actual assets were. Claire thought about that. She thought about Adrian in that kitchen, his voice reasonable and measured, his eyes doing that thing they did when he was performing sincerity, a slight softening around the corners that she had once found reassuring and now recognized as a technique. She thought about Vivian Cross, who had come into this morning's proceedings as a declaration of victory and had left the gallery before lunch without apparently telling Adrian she was leaving. She thought about William Hartley, 70 years old, who had known her for 11 years and had chosen without being asked. She wanted to be precise about that, without being asked to put his name on a declaration, because he believed that the truth of what had happened deserved to be on the record somewhere. She thought about her daughter Emma, 8 years old, who had asked her last week with the direct, unsentimental practicality of children whether they were going to have to move to a smaller house. Claire had said, "We're going to be fine, baby." She had meant it. She had meant it because she had spent 9 months making sure she could mean it. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors at 1:58. Claire walked in first. She set her folder on the table. She poured water from the pitcher. She arranged her notepad. She sat down. And then Adrian Blackwell walked through the door and stopped. He stopped because Vivian Cross was seated in the gallery, but not where she had been this morning. Not in the front row directly behind his table, close enough to touch. She was seated on the opposite side of the gallery, closer to Claire's side, and she was not looking at Adrian. She was looking at her phone, and whatever was on her phone had placed a very specific expression on her face. Not distress exactly, but a kind of determined, private clarity that Claire recognized because she had worn it herself. It was the expression of a woman who has recently decided something. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. Vivian did not look up. He turned to Gerald, said something quietly. Gerald glanced at Vivian and said something back. Adrian's expression reset, composed, professionally neutral, recalibrated, fractionally. He took his seat. 2 minutes later, Judge Whitaker returned. "We'll resume," she said. "Ms. Reed, I believe you had additional exhibits." "Yes, Your Honor." Samantha stood. "I'd like to introduce Exhibit L." She placed a document on the table. Exhibit L is a series of email communications between Adrian Blackwell and Thomas Wren, the attorney who established Ashford Family Trust, spanning a period beginning 41 months ago and ending 22 months ago. She paused. These communications were obtained through subpoena of Mr. Wren's professional records, following a court order issued 6 weeks ago, which the Respondents' Counsel chose not to contest at the time. Gerald was on his feet. "Your Honor, the attorney-client privilege was waived by the nature of the communications," Samantha said. "The crime-fraud exception applies when attorney communications are used in furtherance of a fraud. Mr. Wren's firm acknowledged this in their response to the subpoena." Judge Whitaker held out her hand. The bailiff brought the document to her bench. She read the first page, then the second. Her expression did not change, but her pen stopped moving, and that stillness communicated something. Adrian was watching the judge read. Gerald Howe had sat back down. He was not a man who made unnecessary motions. He understood that the time for objections had passed and that what happened now was going to happen, and his job was to manage the aftermath. The judge set the document down. She looked at Adrian Blackwell directly. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, "the court is going to take a 30-minute recess. During that recess, I am going to read these communications in full. When we return, I am going to have some questions for your counsel that I expect to receive direct answers to." She removed her glasses. "I want to be transparent with you about my current impression, which is that the picture developing before this court is one of deliberate and systematic asset concealment executed over a period of years, combined with a settlement proposal that appears to have been crafted in the full knowledge of assets that were not disclosed." She paused. "I will reserve formal findings until I have reviewed everything, but I want you to understand that the court's patience for incomplete disclosure ends today." She rose. The room rose with her, and Adrian Blackwell, for the first time since walking into this courtroom this morning with a kissed woman beside him and the certainty of a man who had already written his own story, looked across the aisle at his wife. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you have just understood something you should have understood a long time ago. Not with contrition, not yet, maybe not ever, but with recognition. The recognition of a man confronting the specific cost of a specific kind of arrogance, the arrogance of assuming that the person you underestimated was not paying attention. Claire looked back at him. She was paying attention. She had always been paying attention. She just hadn't needed him to know it until now. The bailiff spoke. The room began to move. Samantha laid her hand briefly on Claire's arm. Not comfort, not quite, more like acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of two people who have done a thing together and know it. Across the aisle, Gerald Howe leaned in close to Adrian and spoke rapidly, his voice low and urgent, the voice of a man recalculating every variable he had brought into this room this morning. And in the gallery, Vivian Cross finally looked up from her phone. She looked at Adrian. He didn't see her. He was deep in conversation with Gerald, his back slightly angled away from the gallery, away from the seat where she had spent the morning, positioned as a symbol of his certainty. She looked at him for a long time with that expression that determined private, recently decided expression. And then she looked at Claire. Their eyes met across the width of the courtroom. Neither of them said anything. Neither of them looked away for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only a few seconds. Vivian Cross was 32 years old, and she had come into this building this morning as a woman who had won something. She had felt it the way you feel a victory in the posture, in the breath, in the particular satisfaction of standing in the place that used to belong to someone else. She did not feel that way now. What she felt now, looking at Claire Whitmore across a courtroom that had spent the last 4 hours methodically revealing the architecture of a lie, was something more complicated. Something she had not expected to feel, and was not entirely sure she had the language for. Claire broke the eye contact first. She turned back to Samantha. She had things to prepare for the next session. She had always had things to prepare. That in the end was the whole story. The 30-minute recess stretched to 45. Claire knew because Samantha kept checking her watch, not with anxiety, but with the focused attention of someone tracking variables. At minute 38, a court clerk slipped into the room and handed a folded note to the bailiff, who walked it to the bench and set it down without expression. At minute 42, Gerald Howe came back in alone, sat at his table, and opened a fresh legal pad to a blank page. He wrote nothing on it. He just sat there with his pen resting against the paper, thinking. Adrian came in at minute 44. He looked different than he had this morning. Not disheveled. Adrian Blackwell did not do disheveled. It wasn't in his operating system, but compressed somehow. Like something that had been taking up a certain amount of space had been quietly removed from inside him, and the exterior had not yet adjusted to the absence. He did not look at Vivian when he came in. He did not look at Claire. He sat down, pulled his chair close to the table, and leaned toward Gerald in a posture that was all business, nothing personal. The posture of a man who had made a decision about how to proceed and was now executing it. Gerald said something. Adrian nodded twice quickly. Gerald turned a page on his legal pad. Claire watched all of this the way she had learned to watch things over the past 9 months, without leaning toward it, without needing it to mean something specific, just receiving it, filing it, letting it inform her understanding of what was coming. Samantha came back in at minute 45 and 30 seconds, exactly as Judge Whitaker's clerk opened the door to the bench. Anything? Claire asked quietly. Gerald tried to reach me in the hallway, Samantha said, sitting. Wanted to discuss a potential revised settlement framework. Claire felt something tighten in her chest. And I told him the time for settlement discussion was this morning, before his client committed perjury on his financial disclosure. She paused. In slightly more formal language. What did he say? He said he'd speak to his client. Samantha arranged her documents. Which means Adrian is about to discover that the architecture he built to protect himself has become the main exhibit in the case against him. Judge Whitaker entered at 2:47. The room stood. She waved them down before they were fully upright. Sit. She settled into her chair, set the Exhibit L documents directly in front of her, and removed her glasses from their chain, putting them on with the deliberate motion of someone preparing to do precise work. I've read the communications in full. Before we continue, I want to address a procedural matter. She looked at Gerald Howe. Counsel, your client's financial disclosure was filed under oath on March the 3rd of this year. Is that correct? Gerald stood. Yes, Your Honor. And the assets detailed in Exhibits E through K, the 3 entities we discussed this morning, were not included in that disclosure. Your Honor, our position is that I'm not asking for your position yet, I'm establishing facts. She looked at him over her glasses. Were those assets included in the March 3rd disclosure? A pause. They were not, Your Honor. Thank you. Sit down. She made a note. Then she looked up at both tables. The communications in Exhibit L include a message dated 41 months ago in which Mr. Blackwell writes to his attorney, and I'm going to read from this document directly. She picked it up. The message reads in relevant part, I want to make sure that by the time we get to the formal process, everything on this list is somewhere she can't easily see it. I don't want to be fighting over numbers we don't have to fight over. You understand what I need here. She set the document down. That is the communication of a man who 41 months ago was planning for a divorce and simultaneously planning to conceal assets from that divorce proceeding. The room was absolutely still. Gerald Howe's pen had stopped moving on his legal pad. Adrian was looking at Judge Whittaker with an expression that had been engineered to communicate receptivity, the expression of a man listening carefully and prepared to engage constructively. But his right hand on the table had pressed flat again that stabilizing gesture, the one Claire had noticed this morning. He was pressing it harder now. Mr. Howe, the judge said, does your client wish to amend his financial disclosure? Gerald stood slowly. Your Honor, we would request a brief continuance to allow us to— No. The word was not loud. It was simply final. We're not continuing this matter so that your client can spend the next 3 weeks deciding which version of reality is most advantageous to present to this court. You'll amend the disclosure by end of business tomorrow, or I will draw my own conclusions about what the complete picture looks like. She paused. And I want to be transparent about what those conclusions are currently inclining toward. Gerald sat down. Claire felt Samantha's knee press very briefly against hers under the table. Just for a second, it said that's what we came for. But what happened next was not something either of them had come for. It was not something anyone had planned. At 2:53, the door at the back of the courtroom opened. The bailiff moved toward it with the expression of someone about to redirect a latecomer, but the person who stepped through the door was not a latecomer. She was someone who had been in this room earlier today and had left and had now returned with something in her hand, a manila envelope held at her side, and an expression that was no longer the expression of a woman who believed she had already won. Vivian Cross walked down the center aisle of courtroom 14B with the focused, deliberate gait of a woman who has made a decision she cannot unmake and has chosen to walk toward it rather than away from it. She stopped at the bar. The bailiff stepped forward. Ma'am, you'll need to take a seat in the gallery. I need to speak to the judge, Vivian said. Her voice was steady. It was the voice of someone who had rehearsed steadiness for the last 45 minutes. I have information relevant to this proceeding. The courtroom reacted the way courtrooms react when something genuinely unscripted occurs with a ripple, a shift in posture, a collective reorientation of attention that is half professional and half human. Judge Whittaker looked at Vivian Cross over her glasses for a long moment. Then she looked at both attorneys. Do either of you know this individual? Samantha stood. Your Honor, this is Vivian Cross. She was present in the gallery this morning. Gerald Howe had turned in his seat. He was looking at Vivian with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way that only trained litigators can achieve when something completely destabilizing has just happened directly behind their client. Adrian had turned too. He was looking at Vivian, and whatever he had spent the last 45 minutes organizing inside himself, whatever composure he had rebuilt during that recess, was no longer fully intact. Something had moved in his face, something he was not in complete control of. Vivian, he said, not loud, almost conversational, the way you say someone's name when you are asking them without words to stop doing what they are doing. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on Judge Whittaker. Your Honor, she said, I have documents that I believe are relevant to the concealment issue you've been discussing. I obtained them in the course of my professional work with Mr. Blackwell's company. I want them on the record. The judge studied her. You understand that volunteering information in an active legal proceeding carries its own implications. Yes, Your Honor. And you're choosing to do this voluntarily. Yes. A pause, the kind of pause that has weight. Bailiff, please show Ms. Cross to the witness area. Ms. Reed, Mr. Howe approach. At the bench, a rapid, quiet exchange took place. Claire could not hear the words, but she could read the body language with the fluency of someone who had spent 11 years learning to understand what Adrian communicated through everything except language. Gerald's posture was the posture of a man performing damage control in real time. Samantha's was the posture of a woman who was receiving an unexpected gift and was smart enough not to appear surprised. At 3:02, Vivian Cross was seated in the witness area and had handed the manila envelope to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Judge Whitaker opened it. She read for 3 minutes without speaking. 3 minutes is a long time when every person in a room is watching one person's face for information. The judge's expression gave almost nothing. Almost. Claire caught one thing, a slight involuntary compression of the judge's lips around minute 2, that told her the contents of that envelope were not boring. "Ms. Cross," Judge Whitaker finally said, "you are not a party to this proceeding. You have no legal obligation to be in this room or to provide this information. I want to confirm once more for the record that this is voluntary." "It is," Vivian said. "Can you describe in your own words what these documents are?" Vivian took a breath. She had positioned herself in the witness chair the way someone positions themselves when they are trying to project calm and working hard at it. "They are financial communications that pass through my company's accounts. Communications related to a promotional campaign that NovaCrest ran 18 months ago." She paused. "The campaign had a budget of approximately $400,000. It was billed to NovaCrest through my firm, but approximately $260,000 of that budget was never spent on the campaign. It was reallocated." "Reallocated to what?" Judge Whitaker asked. "To personal accounts." Another pause. "Accounts associated with the Ashford Family Trust." The silence that followed was the loudest silence Claire had experienced all day. It was the silence of a room processing the fact that the concealment they had been discussing in the abstract, the hidden entities, the undisclosed assets, the carefully constructed architecture of avoidance, had just acquired a human witness, a witness who had been inside it, a witness who, for reasons of her own that the court would not explore today, had chosen to walk through those double doors and put what she knew on the record. Adrian Blackwell stood up. He stood up the way a person stands when the physical imperative to move overrides the professional training to stay seated. Gerald grabbed his arm not harshly, but with the firm pressure of a man preventing a significant mistake. "Sit down," Gerald said very quietly. "Sit down right now." Adrian sat. His jaw was working. His eyes were fixed on Vivian with an expression that Claire could not fully categorize. It had elements of anger and elements of something rawer than anger, and underneath both of those the particular and unmistakable quality of betrayal. The quality of a man who had not seen this coming from this direction and was only now understanding that he had made a fundamental miscalculation about who could hurt him. Vivian was still not looking at him. She was looking at Judge Whitaker, and her hands were folded in her lap, and she was breathing carefully the way you breathe when you have decided to do something irreversible, and you are getting through it one breath at a time. Claire looked at her. She had spent 9 months thinking about Vivian Cross in the abstract as a symbol, as a wound, as the human shape of Adrian's betrayal. She had worked hard in therapy and in the long, quiet hours of preparation to stop doing that, to see Vivian as a person and not a category. She had mostly succeeded, but she had not expected to sit in a courtroom and watch Vivian Cross choose a different story than the one she had been living inside. She felt something unexpected, not warmth that was too simple, but something adjacent to it, the complicated human recognition of someone doing a hard thing. Judge Whitaker was asking Vivian a series of precise, methodical questions about the documents, how she obtained them, when, whether she had made any copies prior to today, whether she was currently employed by Mr. Blackwell's company. To the last question, Vivian said, "My firm's contract with NovaCrest was terminated 10 days ago." That landed. Samantha wrote something on her notepad and pushed it toward Claire. It said, "He fired her. That's why." Claire looked at the note, then she looked at Vivian. Then she wrote back below Samantha's handwriting, "Does it matter?" Samantha read it, considered it, wrote, "For the legal record, no. For the story he built about himself, yes." The examination of Vivian Cross took 22 minutes. When it was over, Judge Whitaker set the documents with the other exhibits, made several notes that took longer than her previous notes had taken, and then removed her glasses. "We'll take a brief recess," she said. 15 minutes. Mr. Howe, I'd like to speak with you in chambers." Gerald stood. His face was the face of a man who had been doing this for 30 years and had learned to absorb anything without showing it. But 30 years of training could not entirely hide the slight fatigue around his eyes, the particular fatigue of someone who has spent the day defending a position that the evidence has made increasingly untenable. He buttoned his jacket and followed the judge's clerk. Adrian sat at his table alone. It was the first time he had been alone, truly alone, without Gerald beside him at that table all day. He was sitting very still, and Claire, watching him, was struck by the physical reality of what stillness costs. It is not the absence of movement. It is the active suppression of it. It is energy directed inward rather than outward. It is a performance of composure at the moment, when composure is the most difficult thing in the world to maintain. He turned, slowly, and looked at Vivian, who was being escorted back to the gallery by the bailiff. "Why?" he said, not aggressive, not accusing, just the single bare word of a man who needs information. Vivian stopped. She looked at him, really looked the way you look at someone when you have already done the thing and are now simply processing the fact that it is done. "Because she deserved to know," she said quietly, "and because you were going to do it again." "Do what again?" "Control the story." Her voice didn't waver. "Make someone disappear from the narrative because they were inconvenient." A pause. "I wasn't going to wait and find out how long it took before that person was me." Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to face the empty bench, and he said nothing. Vivian walked back to the gallery and sat down. In the 15 minutes while the judge was in chambers with Gerald, the courtroom was not exactly silent, but it was close. Claire worked through the remaining documents she and Samantha might need. Samantha made 2 phone calls, both brief. The court reporter sat at her machine and looked at her phone. 2 people in the gallery talked quietly. At one point, Claire became aware that Adrian had turned in his chair and was looking at her. Not the way he had looked at her earlier. Not the look of a man recalibrating, reassessing, recognizing the gap between the person he expected and the person across from him. This was a different look. It was quieter, more personal. It had something in it that she had not seen in a very long time, something that lived underneath the strategy and the image management and the careful construction of himself as a man who needed nothing and owed nothing. She was not sure what it was. She chose not to examine it too closely. "Claire," he said. She looked at him. "I need you to know," he started. "No," she said, quietly, without anger. "Not here, Adrian. Not today." He stopped. He nodded once, a small tight nod, and turned back to face the front. That was the entirety of the conversation. 4 words from him, 4 words from her. But those 4 words, "not here, not today," contained something that hadn't been in their communication for a very long time. A boundary, not a wound, not a demand, not the particular anguished silence of someone who doesn't know what they feel. A boundary, calm, clear, and entirely hers. Gerald came back from chambers at 3:29. He sat down beside Adrian and opened his legal pad. He had written something on it during his time in chambers, several lines. He showed it to Adrian. Adrian read it. His expression did not change, but he exhaled once carefully, and then he nodded. Whatever had been discussed with the judge had produced a shift. Judge Whitaker returned at 3:31. She sat. She arranged her documents with the efficiency of someone who has made several decisions and is now implementing them. She looked at both tables. "In light of the additional evidence presented this afternoon," she said, "I'm going to make several preliminary observations that will shape how we proceed. First, the financial disclosure filed on March 3rd is demonstrably incomplete, and the court is treating it accordingly. Any settlement analysis will need to be based on a full and accurate accounting of marital assets, which will require amended disclosure and most likely forensic accounting." She looked at Gerald. "Your client will bear the cost of that forensic review." She looked at Samantha. "I'm also noting for the record that the pattern of concealment documented in today's exhibits, combined with the testimony of Ms. Cross, suggests a degree of deliberate planning that may have implications beyond the civil proceedings before this court today." That sentence, "may have implications beyond the civil proceedings before this court today," was as close as a family court judge could come to saying the word fraud in a forward-looking context without referring the matter directly. Everyone in the room understood what she meant. Gerald Howe understood it most precisely of all. "Your Honor," he said, and now his voice had something different in it. Not urgency, not panic, but the careful modulation of a man who is managing a transition. In light of the court's observations, we would like to request a recess to confer with our client about the possibility of amended settlement discussions. The judge looked at him. You're requesting a recess to discuss settlement? Yes, Your Honor. After the settlement framework proposed this morning has been in the court's assessment materially compromised by the evidence presented today. A pause. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Whitaker looked at Samantha. Samantha stood. The petitioner is open to settlement discussions, Your Honor, provided that any settlement is based on full and accurate asset disclosure, independently verified, and that the proposed framework from this morning is withdrawn entirely and not used as a reference point. The judge nodded. That seems reasonable. She turned back to Gerald. You have until 4:15. I'll reconvene at that time. If there is no framework that both parties can agree to, in principle, we will schedule continuation dates and the forensic accounting process will begin. She paused and looked directly at Adrian for the first time since making her preliminary observations. Mr. Blackwell, I want to speak directly to you for a moment. Adrian met her eyes. I've been doing this for 19 years, she said. I've seen every version of what I've seen today, and what I want you to understand is that the court's job is not punishment. It is not condemnation. It is the establishment of what is true. She paused. Today, this court established several things that are true. What happens next depends almost entirely on whether you decide to stop arguing with those truths and start working with them. She held his gaze for one more moment. That's the choice in front of you right now. She rose. The room rose with her. In the 44 minutes between 3:31 and 4:15, two things happened simultaneously in different parts of the courthouse. In a conference room on the third floor, Gerald Howe sat across from Adrian Blackwell and explained in the careful, comprehensive language of an attorney who has spent a career navigating exactly these inflection points what the afternoon's developments meant for their legal position. He explained it clearly. He did not soften it. He outlined what the forensic accounting would likely reveal, how the Exhibit L communications would read in the context of expanded proceedings, and what the range of outcomes looked like if this matter proceeded to its full extent versus if a resolution was reached today. He told Adrian that the settlement proposed this morning was not a starting point anymore. It was a liability. It was evidence in the context of what the court now knew of an attempt to minimize Claire's claim, with full knowledge of assets the court had not been shown. He told Adrian that the best outcome available to him today was different from the best outcome he had walked in believing this morning. He said, "The question is whether you can accept that." And Adrian Blackwell sat across from his attorney in a third-floor conference room and did something that Claire, if she had been able to see it, would have found both entirely unexpected and in some complicated way inevitable. He put his face in his hands, not dramatically, not with the performance quality that had characterized everything else he'd done today. Just quietly, privately, the gesture of a man alone, with what he has done in a room with only his attorney, with no audience and no narrative to manage and no image to protect for the next 60 seconds. He sat like that for a while, then he straightened up. He looked at Gerald, and he said, "Tell me what fair actually looks like." In the building's small attorney conference room on the second floor, Samantha Reed sat across from Claire and asked her the same question from a different direction. "Tell me what you need," Samantha said. "What I'm entitled to," Claire said. "That's not the same question." Claire looked at her. "I know," she paused. "I need Emma and Ben to be okay. I need to not spend the next 6 years fighting over numbers while they watch their parents destroy each other. I need enough to build something, not to be comfortable to build something." She paused again. "And I need it to be on the record, what I contributed, what I built even when I wasn't the one with the title. I need that to exist somewhere that can't be revised." Samantha nodded slowly. "The Hartley Declaration does that." "I know, but I want the settlement to reflect it too, not as charity, as an accounting. That's what we'll argue for." "Good." Claire folded her hands on the table. "Then let's go back in and finish this." At 4:15, both parties returned to courtroom 14B. Judge Whitaker was already on the bench. Gerald Howe stood. "Your Honor, the respondent would like to withdraw the settlement framework proposed this morning and enter into good faith discussions regarding a revised framework based on complete asset disclosure. The respondent acknowledges the preliminary findings of the court and is prepared to cooperate fully with any forensic accounting process. The judge made a note. She looked at Samantha. Samantha stood. The petitioner accepts the respondent's withdrawal of the prior framework and is prepared to engage in settlement discussions under the terms outlined before the recess. Judge Whitaker wrote for a moment. Then she looked up. He heard Brendan exhale behind him, the exhale of a man recalibrating. "Okay," Brendan said. "I'll coordinate with Patricia's office." "Good." Brendan left. Adrian turned from the window and sat down at his desk and looked at the surface of it. The familiar objects, the photo of himself and Vivian at a charity event 4 years ago, both of them smiling, the photo chosen for his desk because they both looked good in it, not because he had looked at it and thought about what it represented. He picked it up. He looked at Vivian's face in it. She was looking at the camera, not at him. He was looking slightly off to the left towards someone outside the frame, probably an investor, probably someone he was strategizing about even in the middle of a moment that should have been just about the two of them. He set the photo down face up. He had been the kind of man who chose a photo for his desk based on optics. I was trying to understand when that had happened. When the person he had been at the beginning, the one who listened to Vivian's advice and believed they were partners, and felt genuinely grateful for the network and the judgment and the quiet, steady presence she brought to every room, when that person had been replaced by the one who looked at her face in a photo and thought about how it looked rather than what it meant. He did not have a clean answer. That was the hardest part. She thought about Emma asking if they were going to have to move. She thought about Ben, 6 years old, who had been carrying a plastic dinosaur in his jacket pocket every day for the past 3 months, because Claire had told him once that the thing about dinosaurs is they survive things nobody expected them to survive, and he had apparently taken this to heart in the way that 6-year-olds take things to heart completely and without qualification. She thought about this night she sat on the bedroom floor with those receipts and the choice she had made in that moment. Not a dramatic choice, not a cinematic one, but a quiet internal rearrangement, a decision to pay attention, to document, to prepare, to stop waiting for someone else to define the terms of her own life. She thought about William Hartley, who had known her for 11 years and signed his name to the truth of that. She thought about Vivian Cross, who had walked into this room with a manila envelope and a decision she couldn't unmake, and who was sitting somewhere in the gallery right now, and who would have her own version of this day to carry home with her tonight. And Claire found that she hoped sincerely, without complication, that Vivian was going to be okay. She thought about Judge Whitaker saying the court appreciates clarity. She had been clear. She had been clear because she had spent 9 months making sure she understood exactly what she knew, exactly what she could prove, and exactly what she was asking for. She had not asked for revenge. She had not asked for his destruction. She had asked for an accounting, for the truth to take up space in a room where the truth had been deliberately crowded out. It had taken up space. Samantha touched her arm. "Ready." Claire picked up her folder. She stood. "Yes," she said. And she walked out of that courtroom the same way she had walked in, straight, quiet, unhurried, except that the air felt different now. Not lighter, more solid. The particular solidity of ground that has been tested and has held. Behind her, she heard Adrian's voice say something to Gerald low and without inflection. She didn't catch the words. She didn't need to. She walked through the heavy door and into the corridor, and she did not look back. The elevator doors closed behind Claire and Samantha at 4:23, and for the first time all day, Claire was in a space small enough that she couldn't see the whole room at once. The elevator was just an elevator. It smelled like cleaning solution and other people's anxiety. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly above them. Samantha was checking her phone. Claire was looking at the floor numbers descending and thinking about nothing in particular, which was itself a kind of relief. The way dreamless sleep is a relief after a night of vivid, exhausting dreams. The lobby hit them with noise, the ordinary noise of a courthouse at the end of a working day, people moving, voices, overlapping the revolving door, cycling through its steady rhythm. Samantha steered them to a quieter corner near the building directory before either of them said anything of substance. "Tomorrow," Samantha said, scrolling through her messages, "I'm going to need you to review the amended disclosure framework we'll be requesting. Gerald's office will send something over by morning. They know they need to move fast on this. I want you to read it before I do, actually. You know those financials better than I do." "I know some of them," Claire said. The ones he showed me. There are others I only learned about through the forensic process. Right. But your instincts on the structure, trust them. If something reads like a repackage of the same problem with different labeling, flag it. I will. Claire paused. What happens to him past the settlement? What actually happens to Adrian? Samantha looked up from her phone. She considered the question with the careful honesty of someone who has learned that false reassurance is its own form of damage. The civil matter gets resolved. The settlement gets revised significantly upward from where they wanted to land this morning. The forensic accounting takes 30 days, and when it comes back, it will almost certainly show a marital estate worth considerably more than the respondent disclosed. She paused. As for the other implications the judge referenced, whether the concealment rises to the level of something that gets referred, that's not my area, and it's not my call. But the documentation exists now. It's on the record. What prosecutors do with records that exist is their business. Claire absorbed this. He could face criminal exposure. It's possible. I'm not saying probable. I'm saying possible. She met Claire's eyes. Does that change anything for you? It was the right question. Claire thought about it seriously, standing in the lobby of a courthouse with her leather folder against her chest, the same folder she had carried in this morning, lighter now, because so much of what it had contained was on the court's record rather than in her hands. No, she said finally. It doesn't change what I asked for. I asked for an accounting. I asked for the truth to be on the record. What the law does with that is the law's job, not mine. Samantha nodded once. Good. Then go home, Claire. See your kids. Sleep. I'm going to Connecticut tonight. My mother has Emma and Ben. Good. Samantha put her phone away and looked at her with the directness of someone who has spent the day being professionally precise and is allowing herself one unguarded moment. You did something very difficult today very well. I want you to know I don't take that for granted. Claire looked at her attorney. This woman who had spent 9 months helping her build something solid out of the rubble of what she'd discovered, and she felt for the first time all day the press of genuine emotion behind her sternum. Not grief, something more complicated. The feeling of having been seen clearly by someone whose clarity you trusted. Thank you, Claire said, and she meant it in the full weight of the phrase which most people don't. She walked out of the courthouse at 4:31 into an afternoon that was gray and cool and smelled like the city before rain. She stood on the sidewalk for 30 seconds. Then she called her mother. Her mother picked up on the second ring. How did it go? It went, Claire said. A pause. Her mother understood pauses the way some people understand foreign languages fluently, precisely. That good? That good. She started walking toward the parking structure 2 blocks east. How are they? Ben found a salamander in my garden this morning, and we've been discussing whether it should live inside. Emma told him salamanders are happier outside, and he's considering her argument. Claire felt something release in her chest. Tell Emma she's right. I'll tell her she made a good case, better for her in the long run. Her mother paused. Are you coming tonight? Tonight. I'm driving up after I get the car. I'll keep dinner. Mom. I'll keep dinner, Claire. Just drive safe. She drove to Connecticut with the radio off, which she almost never did. Silence in a car feels different than silence in a room. It moves. It has texture. It's shaped by the landscape sliding past. She drove through it for an hour and 20 minutes and let herself exist inside it without narrating it, without analyzing it, without doing anything except following the road north and watching the city give way to suburbs, give way to something quieter and older. She thought about Adrian. She had not let herself do this fully during the preparation period, had kept her thinking about him functional, strategic, limited to what she needed to understand in order to protect herself. But now in the car, in the silence, she let herself think about him, the way you think about someone you have loved and lost and are still in the process of understanding. He had built something real. She could hold that and also hold the truth about how he had operated. Both things were accurate. The company was genuine. The intelligence behind it was genuine. The work was genuine. And alongside all of that, layered into the architecture of it from the beginning, was this other thing. This need to own the story, to be the sole protagonist of his own success, to reduce every other person in his life to a supporting role that could be written out when it became inconvenient. She had not been immune to his way of operating. She had been inside it for 11 years. She had absorbed its logic the way you absorb the logic of the air you breathe without questioning it, without even noticing you're doing it. It was only when she sat on that bedroom floor with those receipts that she had really started to see the structure of it from outside. What she felt now was not hatred. Not anymore. What she felt was something more like grief mixed with clarity. Grief for the version of the marriage she had believed in, clarity about what had actually been there. They were not incompatible. She had learned that in therapy, and she had come to believe it through her own experience. You can grieve something and also understand precisely why it ended. You can miss a person and also know that the person you miss was never fully the person who was actually there. She pulled into her mother's driveway at 6:14. Before she got out of the car, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. She looked at it. It said, "This is Vivian. I know you have no reason to respond to this. I just wanted to say that what I did today was not about him. It was about what was right. I'm sorry it took me this long to figure out what that was." Claire read it twice. She sat in the car in her mother's driveway with the engine off, holding her phone, and she thought about 32-year-old Vivian Cross sitting in the lobby of a courthouse, working up to something irreversible. She thought about the expression on Vivian's face when their eyes met across the courtroom, that complicated, privately decided quality. She thought about what it costs to walk toward something hard when walking away would be easier. She typed back, "I know, thank you." She thought about it for another moment and then added, "Take care of yourself." She sent it, put her phone in her bag, and got out of the car. Bun hit the back door at a dead run and wrapped both arms around her waist before she was fully through it. He had the salamander story ready, a complete, breathless account that began with the garden and ended with the salamander's ultimate liberation into the flower bed, with Emma's blessing rendered in the particular detail that 6-year-olds apply to things they find important. Claire held on to him and listened to every word. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, 8 years old, with the composed watchfulness that she'd had since she was a toddler, the quality of someone who notices things and files them and returns to them later. She looked at her mother's face the way her mother looked at financial documents, carefully, thoroughly. "You look tired," Emma said, "but okay." "I am both of those things," Claire said. "Exactly both." Emma came and hugged her, which she did not always do, without being asked, which made it matter more when she did. Her mother had kept chicken and rice and green beans. They ate at the kitchen table, all 4 of them, and Claire's mother talked about the salamander and the garden and a book she was reading, and Emma argued gently with Ben about whether dinosaurs or salamanders had been on Earth longer, and Claire ate her chicken and listened to the voices of her family and felt for the first time in a very long time that the ground she was standing on was going to hold. She put the kids to bed at 8:30. Ben fell asleep mid-sentence about the salamander. Emma stayed awake long enough to ask quietly, in the practical tone she used for important questions, "Is everything going to be better now?" Claire smoothed Emma's hair. She thought about what it meant to answer that question honestly to an 8-year-old. "It's going to be different," she said, "and different is going to be better. It won't happen all at once, but yes." Emma studied her face. "Okay," she said in the tone of someone filing a report for later review. Then she closed her eyes. Claire sat beside her for a few minutes in the dark. Then she went downstairs to where her mother was sitting with decaf coffee and a book, and she sat down across from her and said nothing for a while, which was one of the things she valued most about her mother, the capacity to be present without requiring conversation. Finally, her mother said, "Tell me what happened, the real version." So Claire told her, all of it. The exhibits, the declarations, Vivian walking in with that envelope, Adrian putting his face in his hands in a conference room that Claire had not seen but could imagine with complete precision. She told her mother the way she had never been able to tell anyone during the preparation period, when everything had to be held carefully and disclosed only on a need-to-know basis. She told her with the relief of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally arrived somewhere safe enough to set it down. Her mother listened. She did not interrupt. She did not react with the outsized indignation that some people perform when they hear about someone being wronged, the performance that makes the listener feel better while making the person who was wronged feel like the size of their pain is being used for someone else's emotional experience. She just listened. When Claire finished, her mother said, "What do you need now?" "I don't know yet," Claire said. "I think I need to find out who I am when I'm not preparing for something." Her mother nodded. "That's a good thing to find out." She paused. "You've been preparing for 11 years in one way or another." Claire looked at her. "What do you mean?" I mean, you've been organizing yourself around someone else's trajectory for a long time. First the marriage, then when the marriage started showing its cracks, the legal process. You're very good at preparation, Claire. You always have been. But preparation is anticipatory. It's oriented towards something that hasn't happened yet. She paused. Now you get to be in something that's actually here. Claire thought about this for a long time. Outside it had started to rain. She could hear it on the roof and on the window of the kitchen, the steady percussion of it unhurried. "I want to do something," Claire said. "Something that's mine, not recovered from what I gave up. Something new." "What kind of something?" "I don't know exactly. Something that uses what I know. Not about finance specifically, or not only that. What I know about being in the position I was in. Having expertise and no standing. Having contributed and not having it counted." She paused. "There are other women in that position. A lot of them. And most of them don't have a Samantha Reed. Most of them don't have documentation." Her mother looked at her for a moment. "You want to help them." "I think I do." She paused. "I think I've been thinking about it since about month 3 of the preparation process, when Samantha was explaining to me how hard it is to establish contribution without documentation. And I kept thinking how many women don't even know they need to document. How many women are sitting at a kitchen table right now, not understanding that the invisible work they're doing has a legal value that no one is going to fight for unless someone shows them how." "Yeah." Her mother set down her coffee cup. "That sounds like something." "It's just a thought." "So was Adrian's company at the beginning?" Claire looked at her. Her mother shrugged with the particular eloquence of a woman who has been stating truths quietly for 64 years and has learned not to oversell them. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, the amended financial disclosure arrived from Gerald Howe's office on day 4, the maximum they could have filed it, and still made the court's deadline. Samantha reviewed it. Claire reviewed it. The forensic accountant, a meticulous woman named Dr. Patricia Sung, who came recommended by Samantha, and had the energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed finding things that had been hidden, began her work. On day 11, Nova Crest's board convened an internal review. The instigation was not the divorce proceedings. Directly, boards are careful about distinguishing personal from professional. But the Exhibit L communications had reached board members through channels that no one publicly acknowledged, and William Hartley had made 2 phone calls the week after the court date that accomplished more than a press release would have. Adrian was not removed from his CEO position. Not yet. He was asked to step back from day-to-day operations during the review period, which was a distinction the public statement made carefully, but which functioned practically as a suspension. On day 14, a journalist who had written the profile piece 3 weeks earlier, the one placed by Vivian's firm, published a follow-up. It was not a hit piece. It was something more complicated, and ultimately more damaging, a careful reported account of Nova Crest's early history that included for the first time accurate attribution of the Series A investor relationship and William Hartley's role in the company's development. William Hartley had agreed to be quoted. His quote was precise and unambiguous. He said that the opportunity to invest in Nova Crest had come to him through Claire Whitmore, that her analysis had been foundational to his decision, and that he had always understood the company's early success to have had more than one architect. He did not say anything negative about Adrian. He didn't have to. The presence of the truth was sufficient. The article ran on a Wednesday. By Friday, it had been shared widely enough that Claire's phone, which had been quiet for most of the 3 weeks since the court date, began to produce notifications she didn't recognize. People she hadn't spoken to in years, former colleagues. 2 women she had met at various industry events over the years who sent messages that were variations on the same theme: "I didn't know. I'm sorry I didn't know. What can I do?" She didn't know yet how to answer that last part. She was still figuring it out. On day 19, Samantha called. "Patricia's preliminary findings are in," she said. "The marital estate is significantly larger than the original disclosure reflected. We're looking at approximately $23 million in total marital assets once the hidden entities are properly valued, and the promotional account misdirection is accounted for." Claire was quiet for a moment. "He had $23 million in marital assets and offered me a lump sum and 6 months in the house." "He did." Another pause. "What does the revised settlement look like?" Patricia's recommendation places your equitable share in the range of 9 to 11 million, plus the Westchester house, plus a structured arrangement for the children's expenses that doesn't sunset until Ben turns 22. Samantha paused. Gerald's office contacted me this morning. Adrian has authorized Gerald to negotiate within that range. Claire sat with that for a moment, not with triumph, with something more sober. $9 to $11 million was not a number that existed in the abstract. It was the concrete form of 11 years of her life of choices made and work done, and a version of herself set aside. It was large enough to build something with. It was real in a way that the courtroom had not quite been. The courtroom had been about truth, about the record, about the principle of the thing. This was the thing itself. "Tell Gerald we'll negotiate within that range," she said. "But I want the language of the settlement to explicitly acknowledge my contributions to Nova Crest's development. Not as a condition of the dollar figure, as a separate clause. I want it in the document." Samantha was quiet for a second. "That's unusual." "I know. Gerald may push back. Then we'll have a conversation about what his client is prepared to contest in the context of everything else currently on the record." She paused. "He built his career on having the story he wanted. I'm not asking to take that from him. I'm asking for the truth to be in writing somewhere that can't be revised." Samantha said, "I'll make the call." She made the call. Gerald pushed back. Samantha held the line. The conversation lasted 40 minutes, and at the end of it, Gerald said he would speak to his client. Adrian's answer came back in 2 hours. He agreed. The clause was drafted by Samantha and reviewed by both parties' attorneys over the course of 3 days. It was specific, factual, and unambiguous. It documented Claire's role in initiating the Series A investor relationship, her ongoing advisory contribution to Nova Crest's strategic development during the marriage, and the board-level relationships she had maintained that contributed materially to the company's growth periods. It was 4 paragraphs long. It would be attached permanently to a legal document that would exist as long as legal documents exist. Claire read it 3 times when Samantha sent the final draft. She sat at her kitchen table in Connecticut. She and the kids had moved there temporarily into the smaller house that Emma had asked about, and that Claire was slowly coming to love for reasons she hadn't anticipated. And she read those 4 paragraphs, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not pride exactly, cleaner than pride, the feeling of having something that was real be recognized as real, of having the invisible made visible, of having the thing she had built, even when she was not its official builder, acknowledged in permanent ink. She signed the settlement agreement on a Tuesday morning, 26 days after the court date, in Samantha's conference room. Samantha was present. A notary was present. Gerald Howe's paralegal was present via video to confirm receipt. No one else needed to be there. She signed clearly and without hesitation, and she dated it. Then she set the pen down. The paralegal confirmed receipt, thanked both parties, and disconnected. The notary gathered her materials and left. Samantha poured 2 cups of coffee from the machine on the credenza and set one in front of Claire. "Done," she said. "Done," Claire agreed. They drank their coffee. After a while, Samantha said, "What happens now for you? What does next look like?" Claire thought about her mother on the porch, asking the same question in different words. She thought about the message she had started drafting in a notes app on her phone 3 weeks ago, a draft that had grown steadily and was starting to look less like a note and more like a plan. "There's a nonprofit model," she said. "I've been researching it. Organizations that provide legal and financial literacy resources to women in divorce proceedings who can't afford comprehensive legal representation. There's a gap in what exists specifically around documentation, helping women understand before they're in crisis what they should be keeping records of, what has legal value even when it doesn't have an official label." Samantha was looking at her with the particular attention she gave things that deserved it. "You've been thinking about this for a while." "Since month 3 of our process," Claire said. Samantha picked up her coffee cup. "You know I know people in that space." "I was counting on it," Samantha smiled. It was not a common expression for her, which made it worth something. "Send me what you have drafted." "Tonight," Claire said. She drove home in afternoon traffic, slower than she wanted, the way traffic is always slower than you want when you have somewhere you're ready to be. She thought about the settlement document with her signature on it somewhere in a paralegal's filing system being processed into permanence. She thought about the 4-paragraph clause. She thought about Ben's salamander and Emma's composed watchfulness and her mother's quiet 64-year-old wisdom. She thought about Adrian. She had received one communication from him in the 26 days since the court date, not through Gerald, not through any formal channel. A text from his number sent 11 days ago at 11:47 in the evening. It said, "I should have said this a long time ago. What you built matters. I knew that. I chose not to say it because saying it cost me something. That was wrong. I'm sorry." She had read it 4 times. She had not responded. Not because she was angry, not because she needed to punish him with silence, but because she had thought about it carefully and concluded that there was nothing she needed to say to him that would not either comfort him or wound him, and she did not want to do either. She did not want to manage his feelings anymore, even toward forgiveness. What he carried was his to carry. Her job was not to lighten it or to add to it. Her job, she had decided, was to figure out what hers was unattached from his. She was doing that. She pulled into the driveway of the Connecticut house at 5:42. Emma was in the front yard with a book sitting on the stone step, the way she always sat, knees up, book propped against them, the posture of a person who has located herself exactly where she wants to be. She looked up when Claire got out of the car. "How'd it go?" Emma asked. "It's done," Claire said. "Officially, completely, done." Emma considered this. Good done or complicated done? Claire looked at her daughter, 8 years old, composed, precise, already asking the right questions, and she felt something open in her chest, something that had been braced and careful for a very long time and was now slowly and for real beginning to unclench. "Both," she said, "but mostly good." Emma nodded. She returned to her book. Claire sat down beside her on the step. The late afternoon was quiet around them. Not the courthouse silence, not the charged silence of a room where something was being decided. Just the ordinary silence of a late afternoon in autumn in Connecticut. The kind of silence that doesn't demand anything from you, that simply exists alongside you and lets you exist alongside it. She sat with her daughter. She breathed. She did not think about what came next. Not yet. Next could wait for tomorrow. For tonight she was simply here in this body on this step, beside this child in this life that was in every dimension that mattered, finally entirely her own. The draft she sent Samantha that night was 11 pages long. It had started as notes in a phone app 3 months ago, fragments, questions, observations she had typed in the quiet hours after the kids went to sleep, when the house was hers, and her mind was still moving. By the time she sent it, it had become something with structure and intention. A mission statement, a program model, a gap analysis of existing nonprofit services in the family law space. 3 pages of financial projections built from the same instincts she had applied to investment analysis 15 years ago, before she had set that version of herself aside for a marriage she believed in. She sent it at 10:47 at night. Samantha responded at 11:15. The message said, "This is not a draft. This is a proposal. Call me in the morning." Claire set her phone face down on the nightstand. She lay in the dark of the Connecticut house listening to the particular silence of a house where children are sleeping, which is different from any other kind of silence. Warmer, more inhabited, the silence of a structure that is actively being lived in. She thought about the proposal. She thought about what it would take to build it from concept to operational. She thought about the women she was building it for, women sitting at kitchen tables with documents. They didn't know how to read, women who had spent years contributing to something they didn't legally own. Women who were about to enter the hardest negotiation of their lives without understanding what they were negotiating from. She did not think about Adrian. She fell asleep at 12:07 and slept without interruption until Ben appeared at her bedside at 6:45, holding a drawing he had made of the salamander, which he presented with the gravity of someone delivering important news. She called Samantha at 8:15. "The financial model needs work." Samantha said, no preamble, the way she always started conversations that mattered. "The program logic is solid. The mission statement is the best I've read from a first-time founder, and I've read a lot of them. The fundraising strategy needs more specificity around donor targets, and you're underestimating legal counsel costs in year 2. "I knew about year 2, Claire said. "I was being conservative." "Be accurate. Conservative looks like you don't understand your own cost structure." A pause. "The rest of it, Claire, the rest of it is genuinely good. The documentation framework is the thing no one has built properly. There are organizations doing legal aid. There are organizations doing financial literacy. Nobody has built the bridge between them specifically for women in this transition period before the crisis, rather than inside it. That's the gap, Claire said. That's the gap, Samantha agreed. And you have standing to address it that most founders in this space don't have. You've been on the inside of exactly the problem you're solving. That's not a small thing for donors, for board members, for the women you'll be serving. Claire sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and her notes spread in front of her. Emma had gone to school. Ben was in the next room making sounds that suggested elaborate construction of some kind. The morning was ordinary and entirely hers. "I need a board," she said. "Real people, not nominal, people who will actually govern." "I have 3 names for you right now," Samantha said. "One of them is a former family court judge who retired 2 years ago and has been looking for something exactly like this. One is a CFO who does nonprofit board work and knows the family law nonprofit space from the funding side. One is a woman who built and sold a technology company and has been very public about her experience navigating divorce as a high-asset woman and the inadequacy of the support structures she found." Claire knew the third name before Samantha said it. It had been in the news a year ago, a tech founder whose divorce proceedings had become public, not because she chose them to, but because her ex-husband had tried to use media as a tool, and she had handled it with a composure and directness that Claire had admired at the time, without knowing she would one day be in a position to understand it from the inside. "Would she talk to me?" Claire asked. "I spoke to her assistant this morning," Samantha said. "She would." Claire put her coffee down. "You called her this morning." "I sent an email last night at 11:20. "Samantha, you sent me an 11-page proposal at 10:47. I read it by 11:15. At some point between those times I concluded that this was real, and that real things deserve real responses." A brief pause. "I don't do things halfway, Claire. That's why you hired me." It was in fact exactly why she had hired her. She spent the next 6 weeks in a state of productive intensity that felt familiar and also entirely new. Familiar because she had always worked this way, with focus, with structure, with the particular metabolism that loves a problem complex enough to require all of it. New because this time the thing she was building was entirely hers. No one else's vision she was supporting. No one else's name that would appear on the product. Hers. The organization took shape in stages, the way real things do not all at once, but through accumulated decisions, each one building on the last. She incorporated in Connecticut. She filed for nonprofit status. She hired a part-time program coordinator named Diana, 29 years old, who had a background in social work and family advocacy, and who understood the population they were serving from both a professional and personal vantage point. Her own mother had navigated a difficult divorce without adequate support when Diana was 12, which was the reason Diana had gone into social work in the first place. She met with the former judge, whose name was Ruth Calloway, who was 71 years old and had the direct, low-tolerance-for-nonsense energy of someone who had spent 30 years presiding over the most difficult moments of people's lives. They met for coffee in Hartford. Judge Calloway read the proposal while Claire watched. She turned pages quickly. She stopped twice and reread sections. When she finished, she set the document on the table and looked at Claire. "You're not a lawyer," she said. "No. But you built this legal framework with Samantha Reed's guidance on the regulatory questions." "I know Samantha." A pause. "She doesn't guide people she doesn't think are capable of receiving the guidance. That's a professional opinion about you." She tapped the proposal. "This documentation framework, the pre-crisis inventory system, this is what's missing. Every woman I watched come through my courtroom who was blindsided not by the divorce itself, but by the financial reality of it would have been better positioned with something like this." She paused. "I'll join your board." Claire had not expected it to happen that fast. "I was hoping to have a longer conversation first. Why I read the document. You answered my questions. I have one more." She looked at Claire directly. "Why are you doing this?" Claire considered the question the way it deserved to be considered. "Because I had resources that most women in my position don't have. I had documentation by luck and by the habit of keeping records I developed in my professional life before my marriage. I had a financial background that let me understand what was happening to my assets. I had Samantha." She paused. None of those things should be requirements for a fair outcome. But right now, practically, they function as requirements. I want to change that. Judge Calloway studied her face for a long moment. Is any part of this about Adrian Blackwell? Not anymore, Claire said. And she meant it. The judge nodded. Good. Because organizations built on anger don't last. Organizations built on purpose do. She picked up her coffee. I'll join your board. Send me the governance documents when they're drafted. She named the organization Foundation Forward. The name came from Emma, actually not suggested by her, but extracted from something she said one evening when Claire was working at the kitchen table, and Emma, doing homework across from her, looked up and said, "Mom, when you're done with this, where do you want to go?" Claire had looked up from her laptop. What do you mean? Like not where, more like which way. Emma turned back to her homework. Forward, probably. Foundation Forward. It was the right name because it was not defined by what it was moving away from. It was defined by direction. The launch event was held in Boston 8 months after the court date. She chose Boston because it was not New York and not Connecticut, and not a city that had anything to do with Adrian or Nova Crest or the version of her life that had ended. She chose Boston because a colleague of Samantha's who worked in family law advocacy there had offered a venue and a network and the kind of ground-level community connection that was more valuable at a launch event than prestige. She prepared for it the way she prepared for everything thoroughly, without drama, with attention to what mattered and indifference to what didn't. She hired no PR firm. She wrote her own remarks. She reviewed the program materials 4 times and approved them on the 3rd revision, because the 4th revision was overcorrection. She packed for Boston the night before, including the blue dress her mother had suggested, and that she had resisted because she was not sure she wanted to be the kind of person who wore a blue dress to her own professional event. And then she had held it up in the mirror and thought, "You're allowed to look like yourself," which is not the same as looking like who you were before. She wore the blue dress. She drove to Boston with Diana, who spent most of the drive on her phone coordinating logistics, and who had the productive, focused energy of someone who has found work that is genuinely theirs. Claire drove and listened to a podcast about urban planning and thought about Foundation Forward's 2nd-year expansion plan, which she had been drafting in her head for 3 weeks and needed to put on paper. The event was held in a community space in the South End, a converted building with high ceilings and wooden floors, and the kind of warm, unpretentious atmosphere that said, this is a place where real things happen. 63 people were seated when Claire walked in at 6:48. By 7, the number was 81. By 7:15, they had run out of printed programs, and Diana was coordinating with the venue about additional chairs. Ruth Calloway was there in the front row, with the posture of a woman who has never in her life slouched. The CFO board member, whose name was Margaret Osei, was there with 2 colleagues she had brought from her network, both of whom had already been briefed on the organization and had questions prepared. The tech founder, whose name was Catherine Webb, and who had publicly navigated the dissolution of her own high-asset marriage 2 years earlier, was seated beside Ruth Calloway and was speaking to her with the ease of 2 people who have found unexpected common ground. Samantha was there. She had taken the train from New York. She was wearing the kind of blazer that communicated, "I am here in a professional capacity," while simultaneously communicating, "I am genuinely glad to be here." She caught Claire's eye from across the room and gave her the nod, the Samantha nod, the one that communicated an entire paragraph, the one that said, "You built this, it's standing now, go." Claire walked to the front of the room. She did not use a podium. She had decided against a podium because a podium creates distance, and what she was here to do required proximity. She stood at the front of the room and she looked at the faces of 81 people who had come on a Tuesday evening to learn about something that didn't yet officially exist, and she thought, this is real. This is the next thing. This is what the other side looks like. "I'm not going to tell you that what happened to me was the worst thing that ever happened to me," she began, "because it wasn't. The worst thing that happened to me was spending years in a situation where I was contributing everything I had, and not understanding that contribution without documentation is contribution that can be erased." She paused. The courtroom was not the hard part. The hard part was the day I realized how long I hadn't been paying attention to what I was building and who had the legal claim to it. The room was quiet, the good kind of quiet. The kind that means people are with you rather than waiting for you to finish. Foundation Forward exists because that kind of erasure is preventable. she continued. Not with anger, not with litigation as a first resort, with information, with documentation, with women understanding before the crisis what they are entitled to claim and how to build the record that supports that claim. She looked around the room. We are going to build something that reaches women before they're sitting on a bedroom floor wondering how they got there. That's what this is for. After the formal remarks, there were 40 minutes of structured conversation table discussions, not panel presentations, because Claire had decided she wanted dialogue rather than performance. She moved between tables listening more than speaking. She heard a woman in her 60s describe navigating a divorce after a 40-year marriage in which she had never held a paying job and had not understood until she was inside the legal process that the retirement account existed or what it was worth. She heard a 37-year-old describe leaving a career in medicine to support her husband's startup and then discovering when the marriage ended that her career gap made her a liability in the court's assessment of her earning capacity. She heard a woman who had not personally experienced any of this describe it as the kind of issue she had been waiting for an organization to address properly so that she could write a check. At the end of the evening, Catherine Webb found her in the corridor 2 minutes before the event officially closed. "I want to talk about expansion," Catherine said. She was direct in the way that people are direct when they have spent years in rooms where directness is treated as aggression and have decided not to adjust themselves for it anymore. Not this month, but in the next year. California specifically, the asset concealment problem there is significant and underserved. Claire looked at her. "How do you know about the California gap?" "Because I navigated it." A pause. "I know what it costs to not have what you've built. I want to help you build it everywhere." She handed Claire a card. "Call me when you're ready to talk about it." Claire took the card. After everyone had gone, after Diana had overseen the breakdown of the setup, and the board members had said their goodnights, and the venue coordinator had locked the supply closet, Claire stood in the emptied room for a few minutes alone. She did this the way she had stood in the courthouse corridor the day of the hearing, the way she had sat in the car in her mother's driveway, not performing stillness, just inhabiting it, being present in a place before leaving it, registering what had happened here. 81 people had come to hear her talk about something she was building. 3 board members had committed their expertise and their networks. One woman had handed her a check for $25,000 and said simply, "I needed this 20 years ago. Please make sure someone else has it now." And Catherine Webb had used the word expansion. Claire thought about the 11-page proposal she had sent Samantha from her kitchen table at 10:47 at night, 6 weeks after signing a settlement agreement in a conference room in Midtown. She thought about the Notes app on her phone, the fragments she had typed in the quiet hours of preparation, the ideas that had accumulated around the edges of the legal process, like something her mind was growing toward because it needed somewhere to go that was not defined by Adrian. She thought about Judge Whitaker saying the court appreciates clarity. She thought about her mother saying at some point, "You get to be in something that's actually here." She thought about Emma saying forward probably. She turned off the last light. She walked out into the night, which was cool and clear and smelled like the beginning of something she did not yet have a name for. And she called her mother from the parking lot because her mother would be awake and would want to hear how it went. Her mother picked up on the first ring. "How was it?" "Real," Claire said. "It's real, Mom." A pause. The kind her mother excelled at, full rather than empty-weighted with something that didn't need to be spoken because it was already understood between them. "I knew it would be." "I know you did." "Are you eating? Did you eat anything at the event?" "There were things." "That's not an answer." "Diana made me eat a sandwich in the car on the way up." "Tell Diana she has my gratitude." Claire laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that catches you by surprise, because it comes from somewhere unguarded, somewhere that has not been carefully managed or strategically deployed. The kind of laugh that means you are in your actual life. She drove back toward Connecticut at 9:30, and somewhere on the highway with the city lights fading behind her and the darker, quieter dark ahead, she let herself think about the arc of the last year. Not in the analytical way she thought about things when she was preparing, but in the softer, less organized way of someone who is beginning to integrate an experience rather than use it. She had walked into a courtroom 11 months ago, carrying documentation. She had spent 9 months assembling to face a man who believed that controlling a story was the same as owning the truth. She had watched him discover over the course of a single day that the two things are not the same, and that the gap between them can cost you everything you thought you had secured. She had signed a settlement agreement that acknowledged in permanent legal language that her contributions had been real and had been material and could not be retroactively erased from the history of what had been built. She had built foundation forward, from 11 pages of notes into a real organization with a board and a program model and a room full of people who had shown up on a Tuesday night because the thing she was describing was something they had needed and not been able to find. She had 2 children who were healthy and loved and currently asleep in her mother's house, which was also temporarily their house, which was also more of a home than the $4 million Westchester property had felt in the last 3 years of her marriage. She was 34 years old. She was in every way that counted just beginning. The highway unfurled ahead of her, dark and clear and long. She turned the radio on. Not a podcast, not news, just music, the kind of playlist she made for herself when she was driving alone at night, songs she liked without needing to analyze why she liked them. She turned it up a little. She let her shoulders drop the last of what they had been holding. She thought about Adrian once briefly. Not with anger, not with grief, not anymore. With the particular neutrality of someone who has fully processed a chapter and turned its page. He was somewhere tonight in the city in the Westchester house that she had vacated and that would be sold as part of the settlement, somewhere living with the consequences of the choices he had made and the choices that were still coming. The board review was ongoing. Gerald had filed the amended disclosure. The forensic accounting had produced findings that were now part of the legal record. What the world made of Adrian Blackwell from this point forward was not her story to watch or manage or feel anything particular about. She had her own story. She was inside it right now, moving through it at 70 miles an hour on a Connecticut highway, with the radio up and 11 months of hard, important, defining experience behind her, and something she did not yet know the shape of, but trusted completely ahead. She pulled into her mother's driveway at 10:53. The light in the kitchen was on. Her mother was awake as she had known she would be, as she always was when one of her children was still out in the world. She sat in the car for one more minute. Not because she was reluctant to go in, because she wanted to hold this moment, this specific, ordinary, extraordinary moment, and know it for what it was. The end of something, the beginning of something. The space between them, which was not empty, but full packed with everything she had learned and built and chosen and survived. She was Claire Whitmore. She was 34 years old, and she had built something from nothing. Not the marriage, not the money, not the settlement. Though all of those were part of it, she had built herself. She had built it from scratch in the wreckage of what she had thought was permanent, using nothing but the clarity of someone who finally understood what they were worth and decided to stop waiting for someone else to confirm it. She got out of the car. She walked toward the lit window. She went inside. And the woman who had once been defined by who she stood beside walked through her mother's door and into a life that was in every room and corner and quiet, ordinary moment of it entirely and